Good morning to you all. Welcome to the West Ham Voice on a Monday morning. I hope you had a pleasant weekend and that the West Ham game didn't ruin it for you. Look, we didn't lose, so there's always a silver lining. Look, before I start, if you're new to the channel, please do hit the subscribe, the like, and the bell notification. It certainly helps the channel to grow. And the bell notification will let you know when I'm next doing a video, when I'm next on live or pre-recorded. But let's start the show because we've got to say welcome to James Ward-Prowse. From my understanding, he passed his medical on Friday. He signed his contract at the weekend, and he should be a West Ham player by now. Probably by the time this video goes out, West Ham United will have officially announced him as our latest signing after Edson Alvarez, who got signed last week. Look, I'm not going to really talk too much about the game. But the main focus of this video is to look at the direction that West Ham United are going to be taking this coming season. Or should I say, what direction David Moyes is going to be taking the club this coming season. To do that, I'm going to reflect a little bit on the game against Bournemouth at the weekend, but I'm also going to look at the signings that we're making in this transfer window. Once we bring in the sort of players that David Moyes believes will improve the squad, he's likely to have a squad that's very similar to the ones that he's had in the 2021 season and the 21-22 seasons at West Ham, because he certainly doesn't seem to want a squad that he had in the 22-23 season. And in a way, who could blame him? 2021, we finished sixth in the league. 21-22, we finished seventh. And we got to the semi-finals of the Europa League. Whereas last season, finishing 14th after a horrible relegation scrap is not the sort of thing that I think he wants to go through again. Yeah, we did win the Europa Conference League. Absolutely fantastic achievement. But many will argue that the only real competition we had was fellow finalists Fiorentina. But hey, that's putting that competition down. So let's cast our mind back to around about January 2022. Back then, our team included the likes of Craig Dawson, Mark Noble, Andrei Yarmolenko, also Issa Diop, King Arthur, of course, and the underused trio of Ryan Fredericks, Nikola Vlasic, and Alex Kral. Now, one would hardly say it was an inspiring squad back then, but it was certainly workmanlike. And every player that played gave 100% when they were called upon. West Ham, at the time, January 2022, was sitting fifth in the Premier League, just 4 points adrift of fourth place Chelsea. And we were looking pretty strong. Every chance of qualifying for the Champions League. It wasn't a dream. We were doing extremely well, not only in the Premier League, but we also managed to get through our Europa League group stage pretty easily to get into the knockout stages of that competition as well. Things looked fantastically good for West Ham. The transfer window was open, and we were hoping to see one or two additions to the squad, which would see us finish strong in both the league and in Europe. In an interview at the time, Moyes said he'd like to bring in a few fresh faces to add to the group of players he already had. And at the moment, he was finding it difficult to get the ones that he wanted, couldn't get them through the door. And he kept saying, we'll keep on looking, etc., etc. Want to add to the squad, the board are behind him, etc. But of course, we knew nothing materialized. Now, a sentence that he said in that interview was, at the time, or at the moment, the ones we are looking at getting, or the ones we would like to get, are not available, or we just can't get. Sounds very similar to this summer's transfer window, doesn't it? Trying to get certain players that West Ham just couldn't get through the door. Back then, you could argue that we were an attractive proposition, as I said. We were high in the league, we're doing well in Europe, playing good football. By all accounts, despite not adding players to the squad and the size of the squad that we had, some might say we kind of lack quality, but we still did really well. All right, the second half of that season was a bit limp, but we still finished a creditable seventh. And like I said, we were semi-finalist in the Europa League. Fast forward to summer 2022. In another interview, Moyes said that people would burst out laughing if they knew the type of players that we were targeting. And he admitted that he'd lost count of the number of players that we'd gone for. Now, this was after West Ham had already signed 7 players in the transfer window, with the icing on the cake to come being Lucas Paqueta. But that summer, out went 10 players, 10 senior players, if you include the likes of Alex Kroll and Darren Randolph. But in came some really exciting players. You know, we had players like Paqueta coming in, who was, you could argue, was a replacement, an upgrade for Vlasic. We had a Gerd for Diop, Emerson for Masuaku, Kehrer for Fredericks, and of course, we had Skamaka and Cornet coming in to add some impetus into our attacking lineup. In that same interview, Moyes went on to say, maybe we've tried to go above our station, but we have tried to get in top players because I knew we needed it. For us, a couple of top players coming in will give everyone a lift and help ease the pressure on Declan Rice, Mikel Antonio, Thomas Soucek. And he went on to talk about British players as well, being really expensive, couldn't buy them, so it was easier to do business abroad. He went on to say British players, the price has been really high, really big for them. And if you're talking about bringing in young players for the next 6 or 7 years at the club, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So what do we take from these comments? Well, kind of what we're taking now, because it's a similar sort of thing to what's been happening now, going for British players, knowing they're really expensive, not necessarily going for the younger players, looking for sort of tried and trusted players like Maguire, etc., etc. But why did Moyes want to go above his station last season? You know, in last summer, should I say? Throughout his whole managerial career, Moyes has built success on taking players from lower leagues, unfancied players, some that would be called mediocre, but he used these players to create solid teams, solid squads that were hard to beat in the league, and actually did really well. Then the comment about wanting British players but costing too much. Well, you know, it's happened again. What did he not learn from last summer that he kind of thought was going to be different from this summer? All right. One difference is we've got 105 million pounds in the bank from the Declan Rice sale, plus sales of other players as well. And with a trophy in the cabinet, I think Moyes has decided that this is now the time to build that British base. So even though we've still not gotten the British players that I guess he wanted, because we're not going to go above and beyond spending too much money for them, it feels as if David Moyes is going for less of the glitz and more of the guts. Signing players, for example, like Edson Alvarez, is a pretty good example of restoring the kind of squad he had, or the beginning of the restoration of the squad he had before last season. Let's be honest, when Declan Rice decided to have the freedom of the midfield and Moyes allowing him to do so, we kind of lost something in midfield, that defensive solidity that I think Alvarez will bring. Alvarez being deployed in that role will restore part of the squad that was missing last season, but what Moyes had in the 21-22 season. That's part of the old jigsaw that I think Moyes is beginning to put together. There's a viewer called Andy who sent me a fantastic appraisal of Alvarez's style. He's a Mexican fan who's been following Alvarez in Ajax as well. And he said that the player is adapted to a modern style of play. He's a competent and flexible defensive midfielder. Ajax fans don't take to him because he's not a flair player. But that's not to say he doesn't do a great job. He's been called the vacuum cleaner of Ajax because he cleans up on the opposition attacking play. He looked great in the Champions League for Ajax and was invaluable for the Mexican national team. He closes down the opposition, not allowing them time to build their play, ending up being forced to play ineffective long balls. One prime example that Andy gave was during the World Cup against Poland, when Alvarez shut out attacking midfielder Peter Zielinski, which has effectively stopped the player from being able to supply balls to striker Robert Lewandowski. He went on to say he's a physical player and he's mentally strong too. And as I said, the one thing that Ajax fans didn't like about him was that he didn't have a lot of flair. That must be music to David Moyes' ears, having a player that does the dirty work, the gritty work in the middle of the park, and not wanting to be that sort of flair player. Now, there are other players that Moyes is targeting that we know people aren't going to like. For example, there's the on-off, but probably more on, signing of Harry Maguire. It's going to go a long way to replace Craig Dawson, who we didn't replace last January when the player left. Um, with those sorts of players, with someone like Maguire, with someone like Alvarez, that's the sort of squad that David Moyes is going to kind of prefer. You know, Alvarez coming in, I think, as a defensive midfielder, I think it's going to transform our midfield. You know, it's going to make it an awful lot more solid. When with Maguire at the club, I don't know if Moyes will play a back three or a back four, but he will certainly have options to do both. But we know Agüero is likely to go off for the African Nations Cup in January, so at least he's got Maguire there as an experience cover. Now, whilst there are other players, central defenders that are available, cheaper, younger, Maguire's experience and leadership skills will be invaluable to a team that have lost their captains in the last 2 seasons. Maguire is also a dab had at set pieces as well. He scored 28 goals in his domestic career, plus a further 7 for England. Look, many fans won't be happy with the players that we've signed or players that we're targeting, suggesting that they're either too old or not good enough for West Ham United, and that Moyes is only thinking of the here and now. But I have to admit one thing. What they're likely to do is what I've already said. They're likely to make us harder to beat. Let's not forget last season, we lost 20 games in the league, conceded 55 goals. Now, ironically, not the worst. If you think Brighton, who actually finished 6th, conceded 53, and Spurs, who finished 8th, conceded 63. So if I was a betting man, I'd say we'll become one of the teams that will be difficult to beat or certainly difficult to score against this coming season. Once, of course, the players are all bedded in. However, as I've said, we're not likely to be the most pleasing on the eye to watch. Another thing that's been missing, certainly last season, which we were big in 2021, 22 seasons, etc., is set pieces. What better way to restore that than, of course, bringing in James Ward-Prowse, who will be a master at set pieces, dead ball plays, corners, etc. Ward-Prowse, Harry Maguire, Alvarez. You know, Maguire and Alvarez really good at headers. Ward-Prowse supplying the free kicks, the dead balls and the corners. Last season, Ward-Prowse scored 11 goals for a really poor Southampton. And he had a part in almost half of the goals that they scored. They only scored 36 in total. But Ward-Prowse isn't just about scoring goals and making goals. He's a grafter, another sort of player that David Moyes is going to love. He's not afraid of getting stuck in to help out defence and to help out his midfield. A clever player at late runs, etc. He goes into open spaces where the ball is laid off for him. It's almost like a dead ball situation for him to get it into the box. So with the arrival of Alvarez, Ward-Prowse, Maguire, and possibly Cole Palmer, which is a deal that will see Lucas Paqueta going to Man City, will this be enough for Moyes, or is there more transfer business to be done? You would imagine that with Aaron Creswell and Mikel Antonio possibly likely to follow Paqueta out of the club, Moyes would want another striker and a left back. Now, it's quite possible that we will go for Kieran Tierney. He's the one that's being heavily linked to us now. There are others, but Tierney's the more experienced. There you go again. And it won't surprise me if we go for Tierney. But at the same time, it won't surprise me if we don't go for another striker. Because Moyes will think that Bowen, Ings and Mumbama will be enough for him to select for the striking positions. But will that be enough? We continue to have problems up front, and the burden of scoring goals cannot be relied on just Jarrod Bowen. Last season, we scored just over 42 goals in the league. That's an average of just over a goal per game, with 2 clubs who got relegated last season having scored more. Leeds scored 48 and Leicester scored 51, and they both got relegated last season. Now, in his post-match interview, Moyes did suggest that he's quite willing to use Jarrod Bowen in the striker role. Let's not forget, Moyes had only Antonio as our main striker for 18 months between Haller leaving the club and Scamacca being signed. So if he decides that Bowen is going to be his new winger come striker, project, he's quite likely to be happy with that. Again, harking back to the days of when we had just one striker up front, which was Antonio. And what about Lucas Paqueta? Well, look, it's fairly obvious that Paqueta is likely to leave West Ham, or definitely leaving West Ham. Moyes, I guess, would have hoped that he would have been his talisman in this team, just a little bit like Jesse Lingard was in the 2021 season for us. However, with Paqueta leaving and Cole Palmer coming to West Ham, could he maybe see Palmer as being the Lingard heir apparent? The young lad certainly has skill, certainly got a lot of pace, a lot of speed, and knack for scoring very decent goals. So perhaps with him playing on the right side of attacking midfield, it will afford Moyes in playing Bowen in a more central role. And there you go. Palmer Bowen are likely to be the Lingard Antonio of 2021 season. That jigsaw is coming together pretty nicely for David Moyes. So let's reflect briefly on the game against Bournemouth on Saturday. Look, said it already in the review. After putting in what many would say was a very, very decent performance in the first half, we then made the fatal error of scoring a goal, which meant that Moyes brought in his defending masterclass. We sat back, gave Bournemouth far too much respect and the space and the inevitability of what was going to happen, where we conceded a goal when pressure was applied. Still, we take a point, which is better than losing, but the obvious question is looming large. Is this how David Moyes is going to set up West Ham United for the whole season? And I think the answer is pretty obvious. The answer is yes. Moyes' game plan after we went a goal ahead was a clear indication of his plans for this season, especially when he also made the substitutions, which again hark back to the old days. Whilst Gary O'Neill made 5 substitutions, trying to change the course of the game for the better, Moyes' subs just smacked of what he knows best: defend the lead, no matter how small. His first sub was meant to give our front line a change of impetus, where a striker with fresh legs would probably worry the Bournemouth defence. However, bringing Danny Ings on for Antonio had the opposite effect. We're not able to hold on to the ball. And then, of course, what happened? Soon after, 3-4 minutes after, Bournemouth equalised. Look, the thing is, Danny Ings is not an Antonio. Danny Ings simply can't hold onto the ball. He can't shield the ball in the way that Antonio does. Whilst Antonio has lost his edge in goal scoring, he continues to be a nuisance up front. But are we seriously, we do seriously need an Antonio upgrade. We simply can't afford to rely on Jared Bowen, Danny Ings to lead the line, especially if we're not able to score enough goals this season. We need a player that can get us, 10, 15 goals, double figures at least. Moyes' second substitution was also another throwback. As soon as Bournemouth equalised, instead of throwing on an attacking player to try and regain the lead, he decided to do what he knew best. And that, of course, was to replace a midfielder with a defender. Now, granted, I understood what he was trying to do. He brought Thilo Kehrer on for Fornals. Fornals, by the way, had an excellent game at the weekend. Well, look what he can do when he plays in the centre of the park. But I knew what Moyes was trying to do. Moyes brought Kehrer on to play holding midfielder. Did it do anything to stop Bournemouth driving forward? Not really. The third substitution, of course, was another Moyesism. Simply bringing on a player with the 2 or 3 minutes to go. I felt sorry for Cornet. What's he going to do in the 2 or 3 minutes he's got? He certainly isn't going to change the game at that point. So, will Moyes' approach and tactics revert to type? Will it succeed? Well, look, I can't really see it failing, to be quite honest with you. But it will be turgid. It'll be unexciting. It'll be frustrating to watch. And it will be a tad boring. But it is the David Moyes way and not necessarily the West Ham way. David Moyes is going back to basics. He's going back to what he knows best. He's going back to the kind of squad that he wants, a gritty squad, a squad of players that are hardworking, not necessarily a lot of flair, with Paqueta leaving. The only flair that we're going to get is maybe Cole Palmer, if Cole Palmer comes to West Ham, and a little bit of flair from sometimes the likes of Ben Rama, sometimes the likes of Fornals, but we're certainly not going to have a flair player like Paqueta. But that will suit David Moyes, because that's what David Moyes wants. David Moyes wants to go back to basics. He wants to go back to having a squad that's full of hard-working players, a squad that's going to be hard to beat. And if we walk away with a draw, we'd be happy with that. If we get a 1-0 win, we'll be happy with that. But the problem is we can't defend, can we? We can't defend the lead. Having said that, the likes of Ward-Prowse, the likes of Maguire, the likes of Alvarez coming into the squad, into the team, is likely going to, like I said earlier, is going to make us harder to beat. But it won't be pretty. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. I don't want to depress you on a Monday. Have a wonderful start to the week. I'll be back tonight with the West Ham Weekly, the live show. So do watch out for that when it's on, probably on just after 9 o'clock, anytime between 9 and 9:30. But if you hit that bell notification, you'll get the notification when I'm on. See you all soon. I hope you're going to have a good day. And, well, let's see what happens from here.